Welcome to Cultivated Live for Wednesday, March 20th. I think this is the first full day of spring. I'm not 100% sure. I think spring came early because it was a leap year. That's what someone told me. I'm Jay Rosenthal. I'm the co-founder of Cultivated Media and the host of Cultivated Live. And since we started, our goal at Cultivated has been to be reader and industry first, providing the industry with the most important, insightful, and useful information to our audience. And while we want you to subscribe to our daily newsletter, we also wanted to meet the industry where it was on LinkedIn and YouTube, which is why we launched this daily live stream about a month ago. And my co-founder and the editor-in-chief of Cultivated is with me today. Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you, Jay, and happy maybe first day of spring to you as well.
Well, I was saying before we got on, you're in Brooklyn, I'm in Toronto. It felt like spring for the past month until last night when it started snowing here in Toronto. And now It looks like it's supposed to look in January, but January looked like March. So anyway, everything's all topsy-turvy, which is a good place to start, I think, in the cannabis industry, because it always seems like what is up is down. But welcome today. We're going to run through the news. You ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, we're going to start in New York. And as a way to alleviate the distress of New York cannabis farmers are dealing with, next year's state budget in New York has a combined $128 million in financial relief. Now, when New York decided to legalize cannabis, the state wanted to avoid what a lot of states actually have, which is a cannabis shortage. So cultivation licenses were issued to farmers early on in the process to ensure an abundant supply. The only problem, Jeremy, there's no dispensaries. So dispensaries still have not caught up with the cannabis supply. And with this supply distribution imbalance, cannabis cultivators in New York have basically been shit out of luck. Sorry to swear. And they have massive quantities of unsellable cannabis that they can't sell in state. They can't move to Connecticut, unfortunately. So this relief bill will go a long way, hopefully, to keep those farmers afloat from when dispensaries keep up with cultivation. But it comes at an interesting week in New York where we had the governor call for a full sort of top-down review of the OCM. We have this budget bill that will give cannabis farmers relief. You are based in New York. Is this the turning point or a turning point?
Yeah, look, I think it could be a turning point. I think it's not a coincidence that Hochul orders her review. Some pretty prominent members of the Office of Cannabis Management have been placed on administrative leave. So we're starting to see that shake up there. And then the $128 million for growers. I think this is a pattern. The context is important. Look, I think it's easy to say in hindsight what are turning points. It's a little bit hard to read the tea leaves about the future. But Hochul is taking it very seriously. $128 million is a lot of money. Is it enough? I don't know, but it's a lot of money. It'll go a long way to helping growers stay afloat until they actually have, to your point, somewhere to sell their crop, basically. I think that's kind of the limiting factor right now. And until they have that, a lot of this is going to be window dressing. But look, at least the governor is taking it very seriously. The review is starting. We might be in a very different New York cannabis ecosystem in the next couple of weeks. At least I hope.
I hope so too. And I was counting back from when she said the industry or the rollout has been a disaster. It's about 6 weeks. So maybe from those 6 weeks, the next 6 weeks, this 12-week period will be the transition. Although the first thing she said was that she was trying to crack down on Google and Yelp for listing. And I get that is a source of contention, but that's not why there's challenges in New York. There's challenges because there's nobody competing with those Google listings, frankly, except in some very small parts of New York City. But most of the state doesn't have a dispensary to go to. And the closest one is almost for sure an illicit or underground one.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's the most proximate of proximate causes. I think the ultimate cause is they just don't have dispensaries open, right? And the market is not functioning like a regulated market. There's enforcement challenges. Opening businesses for people going legal is very, very difficult.
Oh.
Until then, I'm not sure that I'm not sure that getting rid of some Google listings is really going to be the thing that helps. But look, it may help a little bit. And if Google wants to listen to the governor of New York, which they may or may not do, it could put a little dent in things, and it's a starting point.
Yeah, totally. But for now, and you don't have to share your own personal evidence. It's not difficult to get cannabis in New York.
No. Yeah, look, I'll keep my personal proclivities a little bit separate from my public proclivities, but it's never been easier. It's never been more plentifully available, and that is an immense challenge for regulators because look, like taking a little econ, it's a very undifferentiated product, right? The legal stuff, by and large, is mostly the same as the legal stuff. Now there is the testing differences, there are the consumer safety differences, but we didn't necessarily really care about that before cannabis was legal anywhere, and so it's going to take a long time for consumers to change their behavior.
Absolutely, absolutely. But let's put a pin in that. Let's hope this is a transition time for the New York industry. I know lots of people are want that to happen, so we will see what happens over the next weeks and maybe month, maybe 2 months. We'll see. But it's also been, I think, an inflection point in the federal government, which I want to switch to, because the White House continued to beat the drum on cannabis reform this week. So this is now going into the third week. So
Yeah.
first we had the 12-second mention in the State of the Union, which I will play. Hold on.
Directing my cabinet to review the federal classification of marijuana and expunging thousands of convictions for the mere possession, because no one should be jailed for simply using or have it on their record.
Okay, so we had that. That was sort of what kicked off this whole thing. Then we had a mention on the campaign trail, right? There was a sign and someone said, this is, don't jail people for cannabis. And he said, I'm taking care of that. The president did. He was in a battleground state of Wisconsin, which they actually don't have legal cannabis. So it's interesting how that happened. And then the vice president had a roundtable last Friday with Fat Joe and others and the governor of Kentucky to talk about cannabis reform and cannabis justice, really. And then yesterday, can I show you this? There was another tweet from the White House and a subtweet too, I noticed today. So let me show you. Let me show that. President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris believe no one should be jailed for using or possessing marijuana. So, this is a drumbeat. They are leaning into this. I mean, obviously, as a campaign issue and one that they think plays pretty well. Is that how you're reading this too?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think a lot of what the president does is symbolic, but the symbolism of standing in front of the State of the Union, talking about cannabis reform, and then following that up with the vice president hosting a roundtable on cannabis reform in the Roosevelt room, right? Like, think of all the history that has happened in that room. That symbolism is not lost on me, and I don't think it's lost on anyone. And so I think we really need to appreciate, honestly, and I say this as a reporter, I think we really need to appreciate what they're trying to do here. All that being said, it's not really as easy as flipping a switch. And I think as the administration and the executive office starts to dive into cannabis reform, they realize that there's all these nuances that are very, very challenging. They have very limited control over the rescheduling process themselves. They can only kind of signal to the agencies that are under their directorate what they want them to do, right? Being the DEA. And so, look, like, is this public posturing a huge deal? Yes. Will it mean reform is coming next week? I don't think so. But look, I mean, we're in this sort of interim election period where the administration is really listening to voters. It's set to be a contentious election. And here's an issue that they're trying to lead on that 70%, according to recent polls, of Americans support, right? It seems obvious to me that when something is polling that high in the public, that legislation certainly will follow. It's just a matter of time. But how long that matter of time is, I think, is really open to interpretation because these things are complicated and there's interagency processes, that need to be solved in terms of the DEA actually coming up with a recommendation. And, the DEA is a drug enforcement administration. They're not a drug promoting administration. And so the mindset shift that they need to catalyze in order to sort of rethink their stance on marijuana is going to be very, very challenging. So I imagine it'll be slow, but look, like, the president's pushing for it. The vice president is pushing for it. That means a lot. That means something for sure.
I agree. And let's sort of wrap things up. So the cannabis giant Curaleaf, we're on to other news, said that it will acquire Northern Green Canada as a way to build out their international portfolio, especially into Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. The companies didn't disclose the financial terms of the transaction, although I think at some point we're going to find out what those transaction terms are because Curaleaf's a publicly traded company. As well, we're going to stay in Canada right now. Ram Pharma, a Toronto manufacturer of cannabis and hemp-based pharmaceuticals, said it raised up to $1 million in a non-brokered private placement of 20 million shares. So people raising capital in the cannabis industry is always a good sign. And California cannabis company Autumn Brands is launching a line of infused intimacy products called Now Melt, including gummies, bath crystals, and oils. I like that one and how it made it into today's newsletter.
Yeah.
I want to ask, going to ask you to talk about it. No, I won't. But it seems to be, and we write about it in the newsletter every day. There are deals getting done in cannabis that I think there was a long pause on those things, but it seems like things. I mean, I wonder if it's an offshoot of what's happening in the federal government in the States, but things seem to be loosening a little bit.
Yeah, look, I mean, cannabis is a very sentiment-driven sector, right? And I think like any emerging growth, like crypto, whatever it may be, it's all driven by sentiment. But when sentiment comes back, the money starts to trickle in. I think you can get into sort of macroeconomics of this stuff, like with interest rates where they're at. It's been a little bit harder to do deal making across every industry, not just cannabis industry. But look, like I'm seeing a trickle of things start to happen. Anecdotally, like when I talk to a lot of people in the industry, things are moving. Like there's some money on the table for projects to be done. Investors are starting to kind of reshift their focus and figure out who's been diligent and who's been surviving the past few years, because that's a good sign they'll continue to survive the next few years. And so look, like things are trickling back. Is it a return to 2018, 2019? No, but like, will we have something resembling, you know, a little bit of that, an iota of that in the next couple of years? Maybe. And I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I just think of the sort of let's zoom out a second and talk about big picture in 2024. You can think about New York if this is a turning point where the industry is going to start. It's never going to be like everybody open up right away, but we could see within the next 6 months something, right? Like let's say that like a corner gets turned, dispensaries start to open, the farmers start to have product on the shelves, all those things. Like that's New York, biggest market that's coming
Yeah.
online. Pennsylvania, similarly, like huge state, they're moving forward. Ohio, similarly, an election in Florida, maybe rescheduling, let's call it rescheduling, maybe safer bank. I know there's a story that just came out posted just now. Like this will be,
Yeah.
I think, a very big year. And not for nothing, but if let's see, 2024 backwards has 420 in it.
Yeah.
See that?
I mean, look, I think the caveat there is I think sentiment will no longer be enough, right? Like companies are
Right.
going to have to show real financial performance, because we're years into this cannabis legalization thing, and that will be the deciding factor as to whether the industry gets exciting or not. Again, I think there needs to be diligent operators who are focused on cash flow and revenue and not just growth at all costs, because losing money to grow is not really a sustainable strategy right now. But look, the sentiment's back, the excitement is trickling back in. I think the next round of conferences will be a really interesting tell to see who's there and if there's some new faces in the room, because there haven't really been the past few years. So that's
Yeah,
a really good sign.
those people in the room that you don't notice, that you don't know, like get there, make sure you check out their badge.
Exactly, that's exactly right. But yeah, and look, like on the New York front, I've written about this too. That it's possible that despite all the fits and starts, that we have something resembling a kind of normal cannabis industry by 2025, 2026. There's going to be a lot of pain to get there, but it's certainly possible. It's New York. There's a lot of money here. There's a lot of interest here. And despite all the interagency fighting and the politics, like I'm optimistic something will shake out. So
Yeah, and we've seen it. I mean, I would say on a very micro level here in Canada, that fits and starts are generally how things sort of get off the ground. But then at some point, and in hindsight, you kind of forget about those things. You just know you have a functioning market, and then you work on like how to tweak it, how to fix it, as opposed to
yeah.
how to get it off the ground. And I think time is a good perspective on that. Just right now, especially folks in New York are really in the thick of it.
Yeah, and look, like Canada's not perfect by any means, but I think like
How dare you?
if you, yeah, but I say that as a Torontonian, but if you look at the one statistic that you should look at is legal market penetration, right? In Canada, I think it's below, or sorry, excuse me, it's above 50%. In New York, it's in the single digits, but like you know, the process takes time; it'll get there, and I think once you're in a world where it's below 50%, you have something like a regulated market that you can then do policy tweaks and figure out what you want to do with it. It does take years. It takes a lot of different tinkering behind the scenes. But while it's not inevitable, I think it's very likely that we'll get there.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy, always good to see you on Wednesday mornings. Thank you for making time. That
Yeah.
is it for today's Cultivated Live. We encourage you to subscribe, not encourage you, urge you, push you. Please do it. Subscribe to our daily newsletter at cultivated.news. It's right here. Follow us on LinkedIn, smash the subscribe button on YouTube. And also, while you're there, check out our YouTube shorts. We have lots of shorts, and they're pretty good. A little snippet of everybody we talk to. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on LinkedIn, or on YouTube. I'll be joined by Krista Raymer, the founder and CEO of Vitrina, the foremost cannabis retail consultancy. And we'll be diving into a course her and her team have put together to get everyone within a retail environment, bud tenders and others, selling from the same page. So everybody's sort of on the same page, which is important in retail. Think about really sort of key retailers that you frequent a lot, and all the people that work there on the same page. We're going to talk about that in a cannabis setting. Have a great Wednesday, everyone, and buy cannabis from your local dispensary, Jeremy. That's how we're going to end the day.
I'll be sure to do that. I'll tell my mom.
Fair enough. Have a good one, Jeremy.